Okay, hello Sean. This is the video that I promised I would help you out with getting started with recording a podcast, and I'm just going to take you through my process. The first thing I wanted to go over was recording in isolation. So the way that me and my co-host record the MacGuffin podcast is we live remotely. So he's in California, I'm here, not in California, and we record via Zoom. We'll do a Zoom call and talk to each other, and we create isolation of our tracks, of our different audio tracks, by wearing headphones. So I'm using a Yeti Blue mic. See if I can get that in the shot. This is a very standard podcasting mic a lot of people use. I know you were doing streaming, and I think you have a better microphone than this, or something equivalent. So you're probably fine on your mic, but you are going to want to make sure you have all your levels where you want them before you start recording. Make sure you're not peaking the whole time or too quiet or whatever. But we're talking to each other on Zoom as we're recording, just so that we can hear each other. And then we record our tracks separately. So the way we do it is before every episode, before we start, I count us off. He'll take the odd numbers, I'll take the even numbers, or something like that. We'll start from 5, go 5, he'll say 4, I'll say 3, he'll say 2, I'll say 1, and then I start the show. And I'll show you kind of what that looks like once I pull up the tracks here into Audacity, which is the program I pretty much use for everything. And now later on, I'll use other programs to compress and to reformat certain things. But for the most part, everything's done here. This is freeware. You can get it anywhere. You can go to the Audacity's website and download the latest version. And it's very versatile and super user-friendly. So, talking about isolation, it's very important that you are wearing headphones that aren't too loud. Because the whole point of this is you want both of the tracks to be as clean as possible. And you'll go through a noise reduction process, but it's a lot easier to clean up white noise, like if a car is passing, like you probably hear right now, or somebody's outside mowing their lawn, or just you're breathing while you're waiting for the other person to talk. Like, I am a heavy breather because I have asthma. So that's all stuff that I end up editing out through noise reduction. But if it's a human voice, Audacity has a hard time knowing how to clean that as much, because human voices change and there's a lot of variation, and it could confuse other voices for your own, and it can end up fucking up your track while you're trying to edit the other person's. So this will all make sense as I go. But what I do is, first of all, I make sure that unfortunately, I'm using a dual screen situation here, and I'm not using my screen that has sound. My sound bar is usually down here, but I'll usually turn me down to about 60%. I'll turn my mic down to about 60% down here for the audio I'm receiving. So then that way, it's loud enough that I can hear it, but not so loud that when Keith starts screaming and ranting, it doesn't bleed into my track. The second thing I'm doing is I'm wearing these headphones over top my earbuds. Now, the actual sound is coming from the earbuds, which is plugged into my microphone, which is basically its own little audio interface. But these are just my regular listening headphones that I use for music, or when I'm listening to podcasts, or whatever I'm doing. Watching TV, I can, it's a Bluetooth headset. And I turn it off, and I just put it on top to muffle the sound coming from the wired earbuds for better isolation. The more isolation you can have, the better. You want both of those tracks to be as quiet as possible. If you have fans running, heater, anything you can do to make your track as quiet as possible, the better. Because yes, you can start noise reducing, but the more and more you process it, the way I look at it is it's kind of like an impression that you get from like silly putty on top of a newspaper. You peel it off, and every time you make an adjustment, it's like you're stretching it just a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, and finally it's so distorted it's not even close to what you were doing. And that's stuff you learn along the way, and you kind of find where you want things and whatever. But hopefully this video will help you avoid that. Okay, so that's just isolation. We'll move on now to what happens once you have your tracks. So this is Audacity. This is, like I said, the program I use to both record and edit. Now the first thing, I'm going to show you some settings here. I don't know if you use Audacity or not. I'm assuming you don't. But if you do, you can skip forward, I suppose. But I make sure that my microphone is set to the Yeti, the microphone that I'm using. And of course yours, if you're not using a Yeti, will say something else, but you'll know what the name of your microphone is. Just make sure that it's on that, and not on the Realtek or whatever your sound system is on your computer, or else it'll start recording from your microphone, or the microphone on your computer, which is probably not as good. So I make sure that's there. I make sure the speakers are also the Yeti. This you'll know pretty early on because that's what you're using to listen. Because I do all my editing through headphones too, because most people are going to be listening to the podcast on headphones, so you want it to sound good on headphones. And then I always record on mono, and I'll quickly show you what the difference is between a mono recording and a stereo recording. But this is what it looks like when you record on mono. One nice, simple, easy track. Let's see what it looks like when it's on stereo. This is what it looks like when you record on stereo. Now, unless you're doing some super crazy left-right panning or something in your podcast, there's no need for you to use stereo. And all it does is it makes your tracks, especially when you're recording for an hour, half hour, 45 minutes, hour and a half, however long your podcast is, a long track like that, when it's in stereo, it's going to make everything much slower, and it's going to make everything just take longer to edit because it has to think that much more if you just have a mono track. So, but sometimes I do record with other people. Recently we had a guest. He sent me a stereo track, and there is a way you can fix that if somebody gives you a stereo track that you would rather not edit around. And you just go to tracks, mix stereo down to mono, and voila. Now you have a nice mono track to deal with instead of the stereo with the weird left-right thing. Okay, so that's really all that comes down to when it comes down to recording. Make sure your mic is at the levels you want. Make sure that your settings are correct, that it's both the speakers and the microphone are the microphone that you're using to record, and that you are on mono when you start recording your tracks. Okay, so I'm going to be using the episode that we just did. Now, I've already mixed and edited it, but I still have all of the raw files, so I can show you. This is mine. This is the one I recorded from this very computer. And I'll just pull that in right now. And it's going to ask you, make a copy of the files before editing, read the files directly. I always do the make the copy. That's what it's recommended, and then that way, if you did something you end up not liking or your computer crashes halfway through, your original track is safe, and you can always use it for whatever purposes, like this. So I'll pull that in. Okay, and now we will start getting into the mixing and sound editing part of the project. So I pulled in both tracks. Now you can see here, I usually have the number of the episode and my initials so that I know what I'm working with. And I have Keith do the same thing. He had some MacGuffin in there. I don't know why. But, I can tell KF, that's him. CR, that's me. I throw the tracks in here. Takes a little bit. That's why I stopped recording for a bit to let that happen. But as you can already see, the tracks are somewhat different. We're both using the same microphone, but we use different computers. We're in different rooms. I don't know what settings his stuff is on. I don't know what settings his Audacity is at. There's a lot of things that can vary, even if you're using identical equipment. So, as you can see, his track seems to be quite a bit louder than mine. It's just starting out. And a little bit more background noise. Or just reach up here for your zoom. There's also a zoom and minus down here. You can use, I like this, so I can get right in there and go to the exact spot that I want to go to. And first we're just going to start by lining our tracks up. So I can tell here at the beginning of the track, this looks like where we started counting. So I can actually, let's do this first. I'm going to cut all the bullshit before we started counting, which isn't much, but I just used the little scissor tool, cut, now it's bye-bye. And then I'll make the track a little bit bigger just so I can really line these up. So like I said, we're counting down from 5. So I'm going to use this as the drag tool basically. Whichever track you have selected, by clicking on it, you can drag. So I'm going to want that looking pretty. And, well, before I do that, here, I'll fuck it up on purpose just so you know what these tracks sound like individually when they're not lined up. 5, 3,
4,
1.
2.
Welcome to another episode. So that would be bad if we were to export the track sounding like that, because obviously as the track goes, we're going to be talking over each other.
Myself on the
Right,
musical
because you have
cross.
to start thinking about who can sing convincingly.
Yeah, because who the fuck can sing? I don't know.
So that's pretty close, but obviously not exactly.
Oh, shit. All right, they can sing. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know who can.
So, ideally, it's going to sound a lot like how we counted it off. So we're going to try and get that as close as possible to evenly spaced out. 5,
4,
3,
2,
1. Welcome. Now, we introduce each other, and one of the reasons we do that isn't just to start the episode off and to, be funny and whatever. And it's also good just to know everyone's name in the podcast that's going to be talking for the whole hour. But also, it's a really good way to know if I've already fucked up the alignment. Because
San Diego, California.
Cassidy Robinson.
So we'll start off again.
Guffin Podcast, the movie review podcast that dreams are made of. Keith Foster, you live in San Diego, California.
Cassidy Robinson, you are recording from an undisclosed location in the Rocky Mountains.
Okay, so that sounds about right. But what I usually do, because depending on what's going on with your computer that day, let's say something was going on in the background of your computer that slowed it down for some reason, or your internet was fritzing, or something could have happened that made your recording delayed. And there's sometimes, even though it sounds like you're talking to each other in real time when you're doing a Zoom call, you can be a hair off by a second or so. So it's good just to kind of go along the track once you have it aligned, and just listen to some parts where you know you're both talking a lot, and or however many people you do this with. I've done up to 4 tracks. The more you do, the less fun it is. That's why I don't do a lot of people on a podcast. 3 is usually a crowd, and then that's about as far as I'll go. But like it looks like here we might be talking over each other a little bit, and that also just happens. You will talk over your co-host, especially if you have to make a point and they're not letting you get a word in edgewise. But you want to make sure if that's natural or if that's because something weird happened with the track. So you just listen back.
For the type of thing that I'm imagining, she would be really good for it.
All right. Well,
and she's a great actor. I mean,
No, I mean, that's great. I don't know any young actresses right now.
The other person I was considering...
Okay, so it sounds like I'm coming in a little fast, but I'm pretty sure that's just because I'm cutting Keith off in the conversation. It's not because it's recorded wrong or that I don't have the tracks perfectly aligned, but it's because I have to literally cut him off or else he'll talk all over me. So that's something we've kind of, just a natural conversation thing that happens. Actually, we both do it to each other, so no shade on Keith. That's just how we learn to talk to each other.
Hollywood that you met in a pool one time.
Oh, yeah. She might still be a little too young even. I don't know.
I mean, think of how young Fairuza Balk was in Return to Oz. Fairuza Balk was like 9.
All right. Yeah, no, I definitely was not going that young. I was going...
And just so anyone wants to know what the context of this conversation is, because it kind of sounds sus right now, we're casting modern actors in the roles of the Wizard of Oz. So that's why we're talking about the actress's age. Okay. I know you know that, Sean. But if this ends up on YouTube, I don't want to go to jail. Okay, so I just check a few different places. I check usually at the beginning, the middle, and then towards the end. I know how the podcast ends every week. There's always a point in which I let Keith in to plug his stuff. So let's see if we're still aligned.
Movies, that should take you directly to the movies page. Keith.
You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Keith Foster Kid. You can also follow my art account on Instagram at Sticky Note Aesthetic.
Okay, and that is the episode.
Gog and Magog.
And then Keith ends with some quip from one of the movies we reviewed. And that's that. So I know that I pretty much have the tracks aligned. Now you can kind of go in with and fine tune it as you go. If you notice when you're doing other editing that like, oh, I keep coming in just a little too fast. It might just be like a microscopic thing that only you would notice. Or he keeps coming in a little too fast or something like that. Then you might use your mover tool again. And you got to stop everything in order to use any of these tools. But you might use that and just give it a scooch. One way or another as you're editing. But so far, that is about where we like it. And now we're going to get into cleaning up the tracks. And I'll show you what this is probably the most important part as far as having good sound and sound editing. I think this probably goes the furthest. And this is also where you can fuck everything up. And if you overdo it, you can end up crispy frying your entire audio track, and then it's almost irrecoverable from that. And remember, the less noise you have going in, the more isolation you have all of your devices in your room, your heaters, your fans, your air conditioners, you have everything turned off. If you know you're going to have a long recording session, try and get the room as hot or as cold as you want it to be beforehand so that you can go with everything turned off for an hour or so. The better it is starting out, the better it will be overall. And make sure your levels are where you want it. So it's good to do a couple like test recordings of your voice before you start any episode to make sure you're not recording way too loud or recording way too low. One of the cool features of Audacity is you can mute and unmute. Now be very, very careful because the wise people at Audacity decided to put the mute button right underneath the exit button. You hit that X, your track goes away. And then that's no bueno. But we'll go ahead and mute my track, and I'll show you what I do to clean up a track, sort of my baseline. So I want to listen to some empty space. I can highlight just a little bit of empty space and listen to it. I'll hit play on that. And you can see up here the little green noise. That's whatever ambient noise is going on in Keith's apartment or house at that particular time. Now it might be more than that. Right now that's pretty quiet. That's, not even very noticeable, especially once I have my voice going on top of that. That's probably going to drown whatever that is out. However, once you start compressing everything and mixing everything down, it could pull up some of those ambient noises. So it's good to get rid of that anyway. So just find some dead space, highlight it like I did, make sure there's no little giggles or any kind of voice, Keith's voice, happening in that track, because if it picks up like a little giggle or it picks up just a little or something like that, it'll end up scrubbing the entire track with that much of his voice, and it'll make it sound really bad. So go to Effect, once you have it highlighted, go to Noise Reduction. Now, these are kind of the presets. I don't really fuck with these because I feel like this is about where I want it. At some point, I looked up the presets and put that in and then saved it. So these are what I use. If you find for whatever reason that different presets work better for you, have at it. But this is what I recommend, because you don't want it scrubbed so clean that it has that weird noise gate effect where you're talking and then it's gone, and then you're talking and then it's gone. Like, that sounds like unnatural to me. I like a little bit of ambience in there so that it's not just cutting you off cold every single time you stop talking. So I get the noise profile of whatever it is that I just highlighted, which is that little white space there. It's learning that. Now you can click anywhere in here that's just like, not a button. Not the little timeline, but here, like I do it right here where it says 4400, 44,100 hertz. Just right after that, I'll click that. That's going to highlight the entire track. It's a quick way of doing it so you don't have to minimize the whole thing and then try and highlight the whole thing with the cursor. This just does it immediately. Then you go back to noise reduction. You don't have to change any of the presets. And then you just hit OK. And now that's going to scrub that entire track of whatever was in that noise profile. This part takes a while. Depending on how long your episode is, we usually record for an hour and a half, or sometimes an hour and 40, even if I end up getting cut down to less than that. So every time you do this, you're looking at 5 minutes, you're looking at 4 minutes. This is the shit that sucks. It sucks so much, I'm not going to even let it do it the whole time. So I'm going to cancel that, but you would let it clean the track, obviously. And then, like I usually do, I like to go through it and see. Here you can see there's something happening. Where was that? Like right down here, you can see something happening that's probably not a voice because Keith's talking really loud here. And then there's something weird happening here. So let's just listen to that and see what it is. Okay, it sounds like he's just rustling in his chair a little bit. Not a huge deal. As long as it's not something that's persistent throughout the whole track, or that comes up very often. But, like I said, once you compress everything, that could be bothersome. So if something like that really bothers you, you have one or two options. You can scrub it like we did the other thing and just take out any seat rustling that's going to happen in the track. Or for little individual annoyances like this, I don't really go too crazy. I'll just go up to amplify, bring it down to like, minus 40 or something. That'll get rid of that. Just little annoyances like that. Now, you want to make sure you're not cutting yet, because anytime you cut something from this track, you're going to be fucking up that alignment with the track above it. So we're not going to start even cutting anything until we mix this down to one track. But starting out, we're just cleaning. So you just kind of go through the track and see if there's anything you want to get rid of. And you might remember, it's good to pay attention when things are happening. Even though you're in the conversation, you're in the moment, whatever, you want to make sure that you might make a note. Now, I have a notepad. I never use this, and so I end up, having to look at the track for hours to try and find shit. But if you're smart, you'll have a notepad, and if something happens, like let's say somebody's screaming outside in the background, or a car goes by that's really loud, or a train is whistling or something like that, you might just make a note of it with a pen, about when that's happening in the track. Now, you don't have to stop the conversation or stop anything. Just you can keep talking, but you might make a note of it. That would be a smart thing to do that I usually don't do. So that's kind of the idea. And you just want to go through it and make sure that you clean up the track as much as possible of ambient noises. But like I said, you don't want to pick up any voice. You don't want to pick up a chuckle or a or anything like that, even if it's just a really, really small piece. Because once you start selecting that and then run it through the whole track, it's going to greatly affect the way the vocal sounds. In fact, I'll just do it just so that you know what would happen. So this is what Keith sounds like normally.
About the double feature that we had unintentionally lined up for today's episode.
Okay, so there's a little bit of like him chuckling there. Now he doesn't really vocalize all that much. It's pretty breathy, so it might not affect it, but let's see what happens. You know what, just for the sake of this experiment, I'm going to try and find something that has a bit more voice in it. There you go. So there's a little chuckle that sounds, like his regular voice. So let's say you were just like, oh, well, this is all empty noise. So you selected all of that. Amplify, sorry. Noise reduction. Get noise profile. And I'm not going to highlight the whole track because it just takes too long. But let's pretend like we've highlighted the whole track. Noise reduction. Okay. Now you can see how that's already changed his voice because it picked it up from that little chuckle. So let's hear what that sounds like now.
About the double feature that we had unintentionally lined up for today's episode.
Well, it's not wildly different, but with headphones on, I can tell it's tinny. It doesn't sound as full and as warm as his voice should sound using a good microphone. So it clearly picked up some of his voice and erased it from the rest of his audio. And depending on how much of that you pick up when you're cleaning your track, that could be very, very bad. And it can make the sound quality of your podcast sound really cheap. So we'll undo that. So that's pretty much what goes into cleaning the tracks. And like I said, to me, this is one of the most important parts. Because the worse your audio sounds, the quicker somebody is likely to turn off your podcast. If I get 30 seconds into a podcast, I don't know about 30 seconds. If I get a minute or two into a podcast and the audio's bad, and I'm by no means a professional podcaster, but if I listen to it and I can already start with like, why didn't you noise reduce this? What's all this ambient noise in the background? Why does it sound like one of the people is on a telephone and everybody else is using a microphone? Which very well might be the case. And once you start getting into the more advanced settings on here, if you want me to, I could show you how to make people with shittier microphones sound better. But those are the things you kind of want to avoid. So now the next step is mixing. So we already have the tracks aligned, and now they're clean. In our imaginary scenario here, we're going to pretend like we've cleaned both tracks as much as possible without distorting the audio. And now I just want to make sure that when I compress everything, because when you run it through a compressor, which I'm going to be using a different program to compress, when you run it through a compressor, it's going to be judging it from your peak audio. So it's likely that you, at some point, are going from, the very top to the very bottom of the track. Even on mine, which I'm a lot quieter than Keith on mine. But even on mine, there's a few places where, I might have laughed kind of hard or something like that. And Keith's peaking all over the place. Like, honestly, you don't need to record this loud. But it's not so loud that it's distorted, but it's probably a little too loud. But a quick thing you can do, just to make sure that the tracks aren't going to, when you compress everything, that's not going to peak everything, because it will make the overall recording louder. is just highlight everything again, go to limiter, but it's still going to take longer than I wanted to do for this demonstration, so I'll just show you with some selected audio. And again, we're doing this separately. I'm not doing both tracks doing it, because then it would probably just take too long, and it would just end up being too slow to try and do both tracks at once. So on one track, go to limiter, hit OK, and I'll show you what it does. See, it cuts everything off after a certain point. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's making the track quieter. It's not. It's just making sure it's not peaking when it reads it later. And if the tracks are wildly different, like let's say you can barely hear one, you can barely hear my track, and Keith's track was just peaking all over the place, then I don't usually advise this, but you could just hit this, go to Effect, Amplify, and turn it down by like 2.5. Right, and that's going to make the volume of everything go down. That means the quiet parts are going to go down 2.5. That means the loud parts are going to go down 2.5. So everything's just going to go down a little bit more. The reason I don't advise doing it this way, it's really much better to let the compressor even out the audio than to try and do it yourself with your own ears, is because that's going to lead to more distortion. Like I said with the silly putty analogy, it's like you're stretching it just a little bit more, you're stretching it a little bit more, trying to get everything, getting leveled out, and it's a lot better just to let a compressor do all that work for you. So you want to make sure that the audio is close-ish, like not so wildly loud and quiet that it becomes a problem. But just limiting it like this, like I did with this, is going to be better than manually lowering the volume on the track, which could lead to problems later on when you compress it. Okay, so now let's pretend that we have cleaned the tracks, they're aligned where we want them to be, and the audio has been limited. You've run it through a limiter on both tracks so that it's not peaking at any point. Then you'll go to export as WAV. For whatever reason, export as MP3 has never worked on this computer. Now later I'll save it as an MP3, but I use yet another program to do that. But WAV is going to be a cleaner and higher quality audio format anyways, so I export as WAV. And then I always change it to 32-bit. I want it to sound as good as possible before I compress it. And then I'll usually change the track into something like 63. And you already see where I did it. Mix wave 1. Or mix 1.wave, which is what it will save as. You hit save. I was going to say, do you want to replace it? So for the sake of this demonstration, we'll hit, I'll put a 2 in there instead. And then it's going to ask you this. Your tracks will be mixed down to one single mono channel track. Is this what you mean to do? Yes, that's what you mean to do. And this will pop up. Now, you don't really have to fill out any of this information, really ever, for a podcast. But I'll just hit OK on that. And then it takes about a minute or so to save the file, which I'm going to cancel because I'm just going to pull in the one I already saved. So this is the program I use to compress the file. Called Levelator. Again, it's free, super easy. You don't even have to change any of the settings or type in anything. Now, some people who are more, audio engineer minded might want something that you can fiddle with more. This, at whatever base level settings it's at, it's always worked perfectly for me, and I've never really had to fuck around with it. This is what it looks like. There's absolutely pretty much nothing happening. But you just pull whatever track in there. You just drag it into anywhere in this black box, and it's going to start processing the whole thing. And you've worked in music before, so I think you probably understand the concept of compression, but basically what you're doing is you're evening it out so that the low parts are going to be relatively close to where the high parts are, so it doesn't go from one person's audio, which might be lower, into another person's audio, which might be higher, or higher volume. So everything's going to sound like, basically, make it sound like you were plugged into the same interface while you were recording at the same time. It'll give that effect. And it'll make everything sound nice and neat. And it blows my mind how many professional interview podcasts don't seem to go through this step at all. Or if they do, they half-ass it. Because it's the easiest thing in the world to do, and it makes a world of difference on your track. So, like I said, it will pick up certain things. You'll start to hear things that you didn't hear the first time around. So the better you clean up your tracks before you do this step, the less problems you're going to have later on. So this takes, I don't know, anywhere from 2 minutes to 10 minutes. Okay. And now you have, this is the original one that we saved from Audacity after we cleaned everything up. And this is the one that the Levelator processed. And you can tell because it says .output after it. That's the only way you can tell. And yeah, it looks like it's probably, no, they're both 804 megabytes. And they're both the same length. But this is where we start actually cutting. Now that both tracks have been mixed down to one, which is this, and has been leveled, and now everything should have level audio all the way through. Nobody should sound louder or quieter than the other person. And that is this. So this is what we're editing. So we'll pull that in. Okay, now we have the track back in here. And this is the one we're going to be editing. As you can see already, when I have everything minimized, the audio is even across the board. Of course, obviously, there's still dynamics. It's not entirely up at the same level, but it should sound similar. And I'm going to use my little magnifying glass just to get it about where I like it to edit. Now, again, I'm pretending like you've never used Audacity before because I don't know if you have or not. The more you hit this, the more you get into the track. And then you can right click and shrink it back down. Pretty easy stuff. And you'll be using it a lot for this part of the process. So, get a little clip of the audio. The MacGuffin Podcast, the movie review podcast that dreams are made of. Keith Foster, you live in San Diego, California.
Cassidy Robinson, you are recording from an undisclosed location in the Rocky Mountains.
So you can already tell both of our audio is even now. We sound just as loud as each other. And it also kind of enforces it and makes it sound a little fuller. Now, sometimes compressors can go overboard. And if you're already recording, like I said, if you're recording a track really loud to begin with, a compressor can sometimes distort it. So you want to make sure that you're not recording at too high of a level when you start, which I think I've already said, so you should know that. So now this is just literally cutting it. This is just like your editor hat's on. You want to make sure that people aren't bored. So I'm a pretty aggressive editor. Probably more so than some people, but I feel like there's a lot of things you can cut out.
Cassidy Robinson.
That most people don't want to hear. Specifically ums. You know, there's certain like little words that I notice that me and Keith will say, especially once one of us starts saying it, the other person will pick it up, and then we'll just keep repeating certain filler words when we're trying to conjure up a thought. Keith's really bad about saying like a lot. I think he's been in California too long, so he uses like as a filler word a lot. And when I notice in a sentence, he'll say the word like 6 times. I'll get pretty surgical about it. And I can actually get into the track and, cut a word or something. So I'm going to talk about a few movies. So here's an right? These specifically... Now that I don't think is too bothersome. That's pretty conversational. That's pretty natural. But let's say it bothered me. I could just highlight it. Oops. And cut it. Movies specifically. A few movies specifically. Now you can hear the edit a little bit, where we're cutting from one word into the other. And if the edit is too apparent to me, I'll usually leave in the filler word or whatever I was cutting out. If the edit is too sharp, I'll usually just leave it in and let it sound more natural. Natural is good. You always want to go for natural. But if it's at all editable, I'll edit it. I'll also be going through and looking for dead air. Oop, that is not what we want. Ooh. Here we go. There we go. There we go. So, places like that. Movie from the middle of the 80s.
Yeah.
I just wanted to start. That's a long pause. That's a kind of a pregnant pause. So there is some sort of comedic effect there because we kind of go into a bit at this point, but that might be longer than it needs to be. And you would be surprised just cutting some of these pregnant pauses in half. If you do that all the way through, you can easily cut 10 minutes out of a podcast. Let's see.
Yeah, you had some reservations.
I had some reservations
about the double feature unintentionally lined up for
Right. So
today's
this happens every once in a while, and I usually joke about it or whatever. If for whatever,
I'm trying to find something that I cut out from this. Okay, here's something. What did we do? Where was that? I lost it. Okay. So when there's an obvious long pause like this, probably somebody had to go to the bathroom or somebody had to look something up online really fast to fact check something. So we didn't end up sounding like idiots. Let's see what this was, but I'm sure I cut this from the eventual episode.
That maybe. Anyway, yes.
I'm looking at it.
You want to fact check that real fast?
Let's see.
Fucking movie together.
Mm-hmm.
They probably have been.
I think they are. Yeah, I think I looked that up and they have been. But I think they're in that Molly Shannon movie, You're the Dog. I want to say they play a couple in that, maybe. Anyway, yes.
I'm looking at it.
You want to fact check that real fast?
Yeah.
This is the stuff you cut out. This is the behind the scenes here. So, to make it sound like we're just very smart and know all the stuff off the top of our heads.
Play a couple in that, maybe. Anyway, yes.
I'm looking at it.
You want to fact check that real fast?
I'll cut to when the conversation picks up again.
On that, maybe.
Oh, I think you're... Damn, you're right. Shit. I gotta see this movie.
We could even cut more. That's more the natural picking up place of that conversation.
On that, maybe.
Damn, you're right. Shit. I gotta see this movie.
And now that's a clean, nice edit to get rid of the dead air. And that's mostly what the editing process is. It's if you feel fine leaving the ums and the likes and the you knows and all of those kind of little idiosyncrasies that we have in our conversation, you can leave that stuff. That is totally up to you. Sometimes I think it just makes us sound a little better, makes the conversation move a little better if I cut some of those out. But I try not to go overboard with that, but sometimes I'll get in there and cut some likes and some ums and stuff like that out. And really, that's pretty much it as far as what I do with the editing process. And then the rest of the story is just like, we're not scripted at all. All of this is off the top of our heads, as you can clearly see. So sometimes when we get into the meat of our movie reviews and we're talking, we'll end up getting to a place where we just start saying the same thing again in different ways. And you might not realize that's what you're doing when you're in the conversation, but when you're listening back, you'll realize like, oh shit, like this goes on for like another 5 minutes and we're just saying things we've already said. So I'll usually just I'll lop it off. I'll highlight the whole part of the conversation that, if we sounded better the second time we said it than we did the first time, then I'll cut it from the first time we said it. But if we sounded better the first time, then I'll just cut the conversation off. And you want to make sure that when you're editing, you're finding a natural landing spot, so it doesn't just seem like you're randomly going from one topic to another without any kind of transition. So it's good to find a natural transition before you cut something. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That all just kind of comes with experience and knowing what you want out of your podcast. But that's pretty much it for the editing. Now, the other steps I'll do for this is I'll throw on my bumpers, So let's say I have, here we go. I have these saved in a file that I call assets. And these are basically all my bumpers that I might use for one thing or another, you know. So we have a spoiler zone drop that I'll use if we decide we're gonna start, you know, talking about shit in a movie that we want people to, you know, give people a spoiler warning. Sometimes I use these, sometimes I don't. It depends on how important I think it might be. And then we have a movie news bumper that Keith that recorded a long time ago. I haven't really used it in a while because I think ultimately it's just sort of annoying and we don't really need to use it. And then, but the intro theme I use on every episode. This is our theme music, and I'll just throw that in there. Now it says not responding. That doesn't necessarily mean that it is frozen. It just means that it's being a slow little bitch. Okay, yeah, see, there it is. So, and you can use this. This is our intro music. You might recognize it. Now, the original track that I used to have this go much longer than I do now. I realize podcasts are moving faster. Intros don't need to be this long. I cut this thing in about half from what it used to be. So I just hit the cut, sharp cut, and then I hit fade out a couple times. Fade out. Effects. Fade out. And then you'll have a nice little a good little natural fade out. And here's something you can do if you want to move the tracks around. Go move track up. I kind of like to have any themes or bumpers or things like that. I kind of like to have above the main track. And then I'll unmute that. Pull this right about when things start getting quieter. So I have just a little bit of overlap. I like that rather than just a hard, you know, fade out into the track. I like it to sort of fade into the beginning of the show. Welcome to another episode of the MacGuffin Podcast, the movie review podcast that dreams are made of. And so you can see it's fading out as the show is starting. Just for a few seconds there. So it sounds kind of natural. Like I said, naturals tend to be what I go for. But yeah, that is pretty much my editing process. So when this is all said and done, I have the cold open that I want. I have my bumper in. I have the audio is now cut and edited the way I like it. And I have it down to a reasonable length. We're at 120. I think when I was finally finished editing this, it came to about 115 or so. So I know that at some point another 5 minutes came out of this podcast worth of stuff I cut out. But you would just come up here, go export again, just like we did before. Wave. Go to 32-bit. So again, you want it to sound as good as you can. And then I saved it as 63 mix final. And that is the track that we will ultimately, this is what everyone's listening to. So I'm not going to hit save because I don't need to replace it. And it'll ask you if you want all the tracks to be mixed down to one again. And you'll say yes. And I'll show you the final thing I do so that it's an MP3 file instead of a WAV file. Okay, so this is Format Factory. Again, this is freeware. You can download this online, and you can change video file, audio file, and convert things to different types. So let's say you have a QuickTime file that you want to convert into audio because you want to use it as a soundbite or something in your podcast. You could pull it into here and convert it to MP3 or convert it to WAV. Or if you wanted to convert these files here, these from Audacity that you've downloaded, I just pull it right in. It already asks me, do I want it to turn into an MP3? That's what I'm going to say yes. And from here, you can look at the output settings. This is what I am using, the medium quality. Now you can do high quality and your audio will sound real nice, but it's also going to be a big fat file, and depending on what your hosting site is letting you use per month, you don't want to use, more than a fourth of your bandwidth per month on a podcast where the audio quality might not matter as much as like professionally recorded music. So medium quality is usually just fine. In a pinch, I've even used low quality. Like if I let's say you have a month, like I think one's coming up in April, a month where you have 5 weeks or 5 weekends instead of 4. If that ends up happening, one of the episodes or 2 of the episodes might have to be loaded up as low quality MP3 instead of medium quality, just so that they all fit within my 300 megabytes or whatever it is that Podbean allows me to upload per month. But usually medium is just fine. It's not changing the audio that much. It compresses it a little bit more. It sounds a little bit tinnier than it does when it's a WAV file on your computer. You are going to be messing with that audio just a tiny little bit, but most likely you're the only person who's going to notice. So once I have that where I want it, you just hit OK and then start, and this will save the file, and it's sending it to the desktop right now, but you can also send it to this output folder and use that. And I'm just going to stop that because we don't actually need to do that. And that's that, pretty much. Then once you have the audio file sent to the destination that you want, your desktop or to the output folder, you retitle it, and you upload it to, now that it's an MP3, you can upload it to whatever your hosting site is. Your hosting site might let you just put up the WAV. I don't know. I've only used MP3 because I think, I don't know how many people actually like download podcasts anymore, like so they have the actual file on their computer. Most people just stream them. But I know that MP3 is the standard. I don't want to fuck around too much with like what Spotify might have as a requirement or what iTunes might have as a requirement. So I just make sure it's MP3. That's why I throw it into Format Factory at the very last. And yeah, I just retitle it and then upload it to my hosting site, and it's good to go. That is what I do once a week. You just watch the process. Now, that was the abridged version. Obviously, when you're editing and you have to listen to the entire episode again, yeah, that can take a while. An editing day for me usually lasts, you can pretty much add about an hour or two to however long you were recording. So if you were recording for 2 hours, your editing process is going to be closer to 4 hours. If you're recording for, an hour and a half, it's going to be closer to 3.5 hours of editing. That's just, it's the least fun part. That's why a lot of people will hire people to do that kind of stuff for them if they're successful. But as it stands, I'm the guy, and I'm also sort of a control freak. So I don't know if I would let other people like mess around with my podcast unless they really super knew my process and knew my aesthetics. But yeah, that's what I do. That's what I do once a week with my podcast. So I hope this video has been helpful to you.